Okay, so I've long suspected that the observed speed of light is one of three constants given to us by nature. This is the speed, and then we find a distance given to us by nature, then we find a time given to us by nature, so that the speed of light turns out to be one distance per time. As I've mentioned to you before, I'm happy to share the credit for this. I sort of feel, on the basis of elegance, that this will happen. That these units will be found, given to us by nature. So the observed speed of light will equal one new distance per new time unit. Okay. Second topic is the observed speed of light. There's three parts to this. The first part has to do with an analogy that I call the pendulum in flatland. The way that works is there's flatland, and then there's creatures living in flatland, and then in this flatland there's a pendulum. From our 3D point of view, it hangs up here, has a piece that goes down to the weight at the bottom, and the weight at the bottom circles around. But the people in flatland, all they see is the circular motion of the place where the pendulum intersects with their plane of existence. Now, what is this? This is an analogy. And let me point out the other analogy is gravity. For example, we talk about gravity using an analogy of a stretched rubber sheet and a ball on that sheet and another ball going in orbit around it. The reason being that things in orbit around this planet, if you are on them, you feel no gravity, you feel no force pushing you one way or another. So how can it be that you have a circular motion without feeling any force on you at all? Well, our current understanding is that space itself is actually curved by the presence of the mass, and so we use the analogy of the stretched sheet of rubber and the ball rolling around it to explain how we can go in a circle around the planet and not feel any forces on us at all. Okay, I want to point out that in ancient times, like in the days of Moses or Jesus, this was totally not understood. And whereas today we take this cosmology for granted, you have to understand that in the old days, the notion of a flat Earth was only reasonable and rational. And anyone that suggested that the Earth might be round, and that any two rocks just attract each other would be considered out of bounds. But although we know it to be true today, it turns out that there are still people who, because of biblical scripture and because the people who were involved in the Bible in the old days, in those days when everybody thought the world was flat, there are passages in the Bible that talk about going to a high point and being able to see to the ends of the earth. And it's quite clear that from the point of view of the ancient times that the earth was considered to be flat. Now, if you have a flat earth, you don't have 6 directions or 3 directions. You have 2 directions or 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. Up and down are not directions. In a flat world, there's 2 dimensions, and up and down, which are totally different things. Up is spiritual, down is whatever. The reason I mention this is that I believe we're in the same situation relative to light that we were relative to gravity back in the days of the flat Earth. And my initial insight back in the year 2000 was that the actual speed of light, like anything else, is much faster than we observe it to be. In other words, anything that travels at a relativistic speed is actually going much faster than we observe it to. So, the analogy And then what happens is when we observe these things, it baffles our mind because our mind deals in four-dimensional things. Using time as a dimension, or 3 dimensions plus time. We're actually hardwired to perceive things in 3 dimensions, so that when we try to understand the notion like gravity and the mathematics that describe it, the best way we can express these equations is with an analogy, like the rubber sheet analogy. Similarly, the analogy of flatland is that even if you have mathematicians in flatland that accurately plot the exact motion of the intersection of this pendulum with their world, what they're capable of observing, even if they have mathematics which predict exactly how that will behave, what could happen is something from an extra dimensional nature could come along and push that, and to the people in the flatland, it would appear to be a miracle. All of a sudden, this thing which had moved in a regular pattern, now all of a sudden moves in a totally different way. And again, I point out this is an analogy to explain reality, because it turns out that reality is more than 3 or 4 dimensional. We suspect that it's 10-dimensional for all practical purposes. The other 12 dimensions being wrapped up, let's say, in another analogy, like a tiny little ball. But in any case, the analogy of the flatland and the pendulum in it just goes to show that we are not capable of comprehending the reality of light any more than the reality of gravity. So that just as we're baffled by how something can go around something else without feeling any force on it, we're also baffled by how something can go up to the speed of light and no faster. Okay, that's part 1. That's the analogy I call pendulum